Hello and most welcome to 894 of the Heidegger series. And today I will talk about the now and the here. Well, to put it crudely, speaking of time, being and time, varat och tiden in Swedish. How could you possibly be in time if you reject 95% of time? Or even more, 99.9999. All of the past and all of the promises and potentialities of the future. It's very hard to explain. I can't do it. I can't even try. But looking at it, you get surprised. It seems that tradition or heritage, maybe it's a more fitting word. It's very close to the pot I mentioned. Why do you cut the steak into half? The daughter asks her mum. And the mum answers, because my mother did it. And when asking the mother, she says, because I had such a small pot. I would say this is even more intricate and forgotten, never ever mentioned. And it's a tendency, once you start identifying it, putting thinking to it, observing it, reflecting, it becomes incredulous how strong it was. At least for me, I realize fixing on the now, which all thinkers done, there is no exception to that. That has been maybe the most, well, for philosophers without a doubt, the most important, bar nothing, the establishment of presence and existence. But all thinkers, I would say. And it's pervading our culture in a way that is completely invisible to speech, thought, and observation. It is this pre-ontological character. It is in a way beyond words, but not completely. Not completely. It will not let itself into definition, but it can still somewhat be captured indirectly. But just think of it, 99.9999% is discarded in this striving or longing or fanaticism for the now. And you are definitely no longer in time if you are in the now. You are forgetting time, and you're making it a problem yourself. This is not caused by time itself, even though the structures that limits our thinking, knowledge, is built in our heritage. It's not coming from time itself, so it's not a legit characteristics or a property of time. Knowing, as Susie Froebel said, could be one of the greatest discoveries ever. A little bit like the discovery that, for instance, diseases were spread by a smaller thing called a microorganism. Something that people did not know, and once that was realized, a lot of understanding came really quick. But this is also connected to other properties or approaches. And this is this idea that reality is binary or trinary as it comes with times. I'd say it doesn't consist of zeros and ones, neither right nor wrong, or existence and non-existence. I think the crudeness in these binary oppositions are blocking out reality for us. And reality becomes something you can keep in a box, very, very similar to the Beetle box. The fractal realization, starting with Benoit Mandelbrot, clearly shows that reality in itself is not straight, linear, either or, black or white. It has depth in every corner, in every little nook and cranny. And it's not measurable in the normal sense, because every time you magnify, you get more. And that is a trait of reality itself. Whereas the old thinking, which was a blocking of thinking, said that everything was measurable and that was definite. It consisted of a definite start and a definite end at the measuring tape, or whatever it was. And that is of course also implying a point of origin somewhere, the origo or inert point in universe. This trick was also something that captured the mind of Zenon. He lived and died without understanding the mistake he was doing. And in the same process, he put the banner up to going even further away from where the problems should have been solved, and making it worse and worse, more and more edgy, more and more aggressive, I would say. There is an aggressiveness to the Greek thinker because they are being very harsh in a way that takes away the fractal nature of knowledge, time, space, and living, I would say. A harshness. There is a harshness to it. And of course, you cannot be other than harsh when you block out all the past you had and you make it a problem and you make it only to have one singular meaning, and it becomes a burden for you. And I would say for most people today, the future is a burden also, because by blocking it out, it becomes troublesome. And as Susie Frobel says, there is no possibility of entering the future if you don't go into fractality, because it needs to be read with something that is fractal, the self. And if you block that out, you can't know anything about the future. And she has a keen understanding why we have become rational rather quickly, I would say, too. It's a new tendency, but of course, in the process, the ego is constructed as well, and the ego tells with a pride tall tale that he's more rational than ever. And this claim of absolute rationality is something that everyone explains they are having. That is the illusion of the ego. He cannot have any knowledge because he consists of taking away the future and taking away the past. So he's a not knowing thing. His essence is, his arche, if you want, is not knowledge. So of course, this is a line and page 73 in Susie Frobel, there's no wonder that we are more irrational than ever in human history. The reason being that the self point doesn't have any knowledge at all. And I will later come into space that actually applies for both space and knowledge as a thing. Another way of explaining now, and these are all different approaches coming from different direction. They don't cover all of this. They're not supposed to, because they cannot. They are not definitions. There are more suggestions. And that thing could be that now is a point of non-awareness, where you are not aware, where attention doesn't exist, where you block attention, you block space around you, and you block out time, and whoops, you got now. This is also something called cognitive dissociation, and that is the modern striving. When something is painful, we don't shy away from it, we go further into it, we accept it. Also a new trait, that's a modern trait of accepting not knowing, and also pain, and bringing more pain to our existence as a proof that we are really living in reality. We get used to the bad stuff, and we become almost addicted to worries, anxiousness, rumination. Something Due Despacio mentioned that very common among human men to be addicted to the different stress hormones. They are a bundle, a couple of hundred. And once you get that hype they give, you continue to give you doses of stress. They give you energy in a very short moment. But since time is gone, why plan? Because planning in itself brings pain. So it's circular once more. Let's be even more in the now. That's the message from the stress hormones. And we can always, by worry, get our hormonal system to give it that pleasure immediately. Pleasure, pain rather. They come with a terrible hangover, heightened pulse, lack of balance, lack of focus. And since you don't have a continuous consciousness or an awareness, you will also be unable to discover this problematic circular reasoning and also circular poisoning. And of course, I mentioned that before, the methods of getting rid of this stress is even worse than the stress itself. People often say to stress people, I heard it many times to myself, why don't you relax? Which is so superficial and so ignorant. It reminds me of psychology, where a therapist wants to convince the patient that they are better. And to say that they are better and learn them the so-called happy reflex, that they smile automatically and they put that fake smile on their face. Very hard to tell from a proper smile, but that seemed to be the method, convincing the person of not having the guilt of being unhappy. There is better solutions, thank God, these days. We should be happy to be living in the present for once. Although we have climate crisis and God knows what, we have come to this most important discovery of the dual nature of reality, and that it is not completely one, either emptiness or existence. It could actually be both. Well, after that little introduction, let me go into a more spatial approach. We ventured in for the first time really into time, thanks to Susie Frobel and her excellent book. It's on its way, I can tell. In a week or two it will have hit UB40, that was a band as well. Red Wine, I think they sang. I would talk about the spatial thing, monosemism, and displacement. And this is the core of deconstruction, the constant displacement. I've been at it before, but I think a new and broader understanding has developed since time came into the picture. And it's an understanding that displacement, let me put it like this, I thought displacement, well, I read carefully, displacement is part of showing that meaning constantly is displaced. As me coming from analytical philosophy, logic, linguistics, all that places, there still has been a lingering feeling that this deconstruction still in this case is a sort of criticism. I don't know. It's like I only understand halfway, and I needed the realization of fractal time to go further. And this should actually be put on the board because it's so important. Deconstruction is not a criticism of anything. I know, for my sake, I've been repeating that myself, but it could actually have to remember that very carefully. You could draw it on your forearm or somewhere and look at it every morning, because it is very important. But we still will think it's a criticism. I think there is no avoidance really. And maybe it's not such a big problem once you understand it. Displacement, the idea of having one meaning in one word takes a now, because in a now the meaning can be fixed. Obviously, in more expanded time, meaning cannot be fixed because it changes because of relationship, context, and so forth. So you need the nowness to fix something in the present. And here, so far I understood until recently also, even in the now displacement take place, the meaning and the signifier is always disjunct. Regardless of what Saussure said, can be shown clearly that self-identity, in the sense that one meaning is the same as itself, doesn't work. It is constantly different from itself because there is a time span. So here you see how time comes in, and you could say there's three realizations that help me there. The demise of self-identity, 2, the passage of time in a fractal manner, and 3rd, the mirror. Mirror is free from being critical. Mirror is just showing what could be, or what you could think, or what you could misunderstand. These 3 things: what you can think, what you can misunderstand, and what just is. and you want to look into the mirror, there's a time delay, you want to freeze, and you want to say the onlooker is the original. In the same way, you want to say a word, you reflect yourself in that word and your sort of intention or meaning-giving situation. And you try to stop it with all your might from changing. It is like stopping a train, pulling the handbrake, and it won't stop, and then you pull all the handbrakes and the big brake in the locomotive. It doesn't work, and you reverse the engine, and finally it stops. But you put so much force into the stopping, it will actually go the other way, and still you haven't managed it for it to stop. This is the drifting of meaning. It will always happen because the now is not identical to itself. So all tryout at monosemism is self-defeating. It will never ever work. This is very similar to a cat trying to chase its tail. It doesn't matter if it tries hard or soft, it won't reach its tail. But the seeking for definite meaning still continues. And this is this incessant trying for a fixation that is sort of the movement, the energy of the metaphysics of presence. And it is not as still as it claims, but rather a constant moving, trying to keep everything in position, to hold it down, constantly chasing meaning, and the very instant of forgetting it to difference, displacement or difference or disjunction. So the very promise of the monosemic tendency is constantly broken in the hunt for presence. They're looking into the mirror, trying to find the true original will already cause another mirror image to appear. And this is very close to that house that once existed in Gothenburg called Lustiga huset, or the funny house. It was filled with mirrors that caused this effect that the further you looked into them, the further you could see the, well, let's say the original. But for every time you stopped looking, it went further and further and further away. It never ended. And this looking for presence could never ever end. The only chance of it to survive as a movement is that you constantly forget what you started with. It is the amnesia that makes it possible for this to go on. For every time you don't find it, you forget that in the same instance. It's this lack of awareness that you never found it. So you strive more and more and more. And by adding narrowness, because looking into the mirror, and this is what made me nauseous at that time, why I didn't like that particular amusement house. And that it is making you nauseous. You narrow down too much and everything disappears, and you just go into the mirror, and it's for someone who's prone to seasickness, it's just too much. So far so good. This is what I understood. But it is not a criticism of this tendency for presence. And in a way it's actually showing that the idea of stability presence is in itself what it disrupts. So for stillness and stability to actually come into the picture, we could just stop chasing the tail. It's that easy. It's not much more to it. Once we understand our constant chasing, how thoughts come on thoughts, and this rumination, there is just expansion in time, and there is stability just coming into the picture. It's the hunting itself that causes the problem. And the hunting is not a hunting or a no hunting, it's a scale. Everything is a scale. You can't directly stop with it because there is not zeros and ones in reality. Reality is fractal, so everything is incremental. It's a little step towards something. And self-identity, of course, take the form. Once more, the mirror showed me that. In one take of the mirror, there is just 0 and 1. The mirror reflection is 0, and the one looking into it is the 1, the real, the existing, the originary. Well, in a way, they both exist at the very same time. Both are part of reality. No one of those are, in a way, less real, less originary, and sort of pop up at the same time. And part of my doing is defining at the moment which I prefer. That is reality in doing. Whereas looking at it afterwards, it is just that, looking at it afterwards. Even if the time span is minuscule, it's very, very small, it is always too late. So once you stop chasing or lessening the chastening of the tail, there can be stillness and there could be resilience. You can build this resilience more and more and make it more and more energizing for your system. And this is dwelling into the prana, dwelling into the very energy that makes up our being. Let's go into space. I can do that now after having time. I'd say space is having the same thing. It's always constantly displaced and out of place. And this is rather the search or the plea for localization. And as space is the other side of presence or time, and there we have rather the fixation of the origo, and I have to say it's somewhat different, but there are parallels between the origo and the now, because you need a now to have an origo. But here we come to localization. It's going on in space. And deconstruction here goes so nicely hand in hand what we learned from quantum mechanics. And that is that localization in the traditional ontic sense is impossible, because there is a constant displacement in time. In space, I should have said. Once you try to find a localization, you will lose it. This is chasing the tail all over. If you give it up more and more, you will see things stay in place. Here we have the search for defining things, making them sit in one place, That is the fixation of space. The want to establish an origo, an absolute inert point of reference. Inert point of reference was the origo of Newton. The origo in the coordinate system is like what we mostly have, stemming all the way back from Cartesius, I would say. It was traits of it even earlier on. We want to know where things are, but things are constantly displaced, so the very act of localizing them will put them out of place. And this is quite literally from quantum mechanics. If you want to put photons to decide where is the atom, it will move a bit. And this is the very character of reality. And I think it was here I realized it's not a criticism. This is actually a gateway to show how reality actually works, and that it is partly us with our strivings to make reality fit some deep, hidden, unconscious want that puts us out of place. And it also shows that this want is completely natural in some senses. This is well established, it has happened in history, it is a historical fact, so to speak. It's not a complete no existence. It's a take on knowledge that is limiting. It comes from knowledge, and that means that knowledge can actually change it. Not beyond change. It's not beyond understanding, I would say it's even more correct. Otherwise, it wouldn't make any sense. It would be like, I need now, I take away everything that is time. In this case, it would be like, we have space, but I can't understand it. It doesn't make any sense to me. I hope it doesn't for you. There is space, but we can't understand it. Doesn't work. That's honest to God. I would say now, and this is my decision, it's going to turn up tomorrow, space is understandable. That's it. Even though an electron has to take 2 spins to get back to the same place, space is open to knowledge. It is not how we want it to be, that's another thing, but it is still potentially understandable on a scale, because there is no absolute understanding, because that word doesn't even mean anything. Because remember fractality, there's not an exact correspondence. Because looking into correspondence will show you, you don't mean anything when you say that. You're just stuck somewhere. It's like inventing a word and asking everybody who's around you, what does it mean? Well, it doesn't mean anything, you just invented it. Maybe you can say the word means, I invented it. But it doesn't have any more meaning than that. And then you will see that the gestalt of the world out there, being at large, lost somewhere to our influence, is in itself not knowledge. You will see that the world is accessible. And that somewhere something is out of sync. It's your pretensions before you enter what's presencing that can be opened up, and they are enforcing time-wise and space-wise. Time, it is because it comes beforehand. You're sort of beforehand and after in a way. You want to decide what something is after it happened. This is not what Federer does. And I think that's a more deep point on the speech made by Roger Penrose on his 90th, and that in some sense Federer decides where the ball is. Might seem odd, but it is hell of a lot less odd than localization. It's a co-active work to have a reality that takes the fractality of you and the outer thing, the difference. So now all of a sudden for me, Federer doesn't seem that magical. Well, of course his skill is magical, but it is not so funny to construct things in that way. See, space is having the potentiality of being understandable. It's a bit of being out of sync. You send out the signals that everything is already decided, and then you look what is already decided that you yourself sent out, so to speak. And then you get this idea of the representation out there. And this is the problem with the current Gestalt. It does not allow for a now and a here to be at the very same time. That is not allowed. It has to, according to its internal logic, to be a disjunct. I realized that from the mirror, because there is either a time lag or a distance difference. I realized, according to our current Gestalt, now and here can ever be at the same place. And I would say that that is actually allowed. And that is the true working of reality. And that means that now once you invite here to be here at the same time, all of a sudden it's the deciding factor when the ball hit the racket. And that is quite different. That is in time, not outside of time. And you need to access both past and future, and all of a sudden you are in time. This is a whole different game than the previous Gestalt showed. This exclusing thing is not a logic in itself, it's pre-logical. And it's this pre-logical Gestalt that sort of sets the rules. But they are open, these rules are open to inspection, and you can see all of a sudden they open up, they expand. I would say this is the same expansion you have in space. And you see all of a sudden these contradictions that seem to be in this very same spot can be next to each other. And then they do not cause any problem. So the now can be the whole of time and the whole of space. And this sounds very much like the time of Julian Barber, where everything starts with what he calls global taking in the whole. And that is observance actually in the take of Julian Barber. Something I never understood until now recently either. It is that is observation, and it's a participating in. This is a hint I feel is good for me anyway. It's participatory in a quite different way. It's more vivid, it's more energizing and nutritional. It's like a good nutritional food that gives you the sustenance you need to continue to understand and to live on. And you can access the future, and you have no problem with the now either. It ceases to be problematic in that way, ceases to be something of an obstacle. And ceases is on a gradation scale, as always. It will not happen like this. Something do happen like that. But this thing is a gradual expansion that always go gradually and is not incremental in the idea 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Because that in itself is part and parcel of the logocentrism or the metaphysics of the presence. It's part of that ballpark or gestalt. Open up, be presencing. Okay, I say thank you very much and I wish you a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye for now.